Is everybody ready? All right. I want to thank everybody for coming here so early in the morning. Congratulations. I hope you didn't have too late a night. I want to thank all of you who are coming online. And I know some of you are many different places in the world. So I'm just glad you're all here and you made it. So one of the things I'll just tell you, my name is Leslie Schultz, and I just think of myself as a teacher. I've been a teacher for a long time, but my current role is accessibility tester, but I still think of myself as a teacher. So coming to present is just like comfortable for me. So I'm really glad to be here and glad you're here. So today we're going to talk about fun facts about keyboarding. Now, I guess you have to be something of a nerd to think that keyboarding is fun, but it is for me, and I hope it is for you. So when I came up with that title, it just worked for me. So we'll see how all that works. So I got into accessibility it began starting about 10 years ago when I was teaching web design at the college level. And I started reading more about it and thinking my web design students needed to know more about accessibility. So I started learning more about it and teaching it some and reading up on it and studying it. Finally ended up with a position with Cengage, which is an educational publisher, doing accessibility testing for them. But I can remember, and that's one of the things about being a teacher, I can remember when I didn't know stuff. I can really remember not knowing stuff. And so when I learned it, I thought, I'll bet other people don't know stuff too. There's stuff they haven't learned yet, or maybe they'd like a review. So when I started doing this fun facts about keyboarding, that was part of what was going through my head is there was stuff I wished I had known earlier. So I'll try to get you to clue in on some of this also. So, all right, now our purpose and our audience, our purpose is to understand keyboard navigation and interaction in order to identify and support best practices. Now, when I started writing this presentation, my thought was that I was talking to testers who needed to check accessibility, but also to designers and developers who want to create accessible sites. So whatever your role, and I'm not going to pin you to it right now because some of us have multiple roles and it'd be hard to say for sure, but you probably fit somewhere in this scope, or you just want to know more about this accessibility stuff. So I hope this fits what you needed today. So I had, okay, to myself, I'm saying like, what's the question? What are the questions that I want to answer? So to understand keyboard navigation, we must answer these questions. Who uses keyboard navigation and why? And also, how do they navigate? How do they interact? And what can we do to make this be a great experience? So that's my goal today. All right, now I want to make a distinction between navigation and interaction. Navigation is basically moving around, getting where you need to go. And then interaction is like to perform tasks. So those are kind of two parts that I want to look at today. So one question is, who relies on keyboard navigation and why do they rely on that? All right, so I thought to myself, a good start a lot of times is to have a persona in mind. So I started thinking about different persona that might use the keyboard. So my first persona says, I want to use a keyboard, not a mouse. Now, whether it's a personal preference or a physical concern, some people prefer the keyboard. And I'm not going to go into medical reasons. This is not a medical seminar, but I mean, there's just reasons why some people really need to use a keyboard, and we have to value what they choose. Now, the second person might use a screen reader. The screen reader user uses a keyboard and also shortcut keys, but never a mouse. Well, I kind of want to tell you that when I first started practicing with a screen reader many years ago, I did not really get that screen reader users don't use mice. I don't know what I was thinking. They don't use mice. Okay. So that was like one of the first, oh, light bulb, no mouse. Why? Because they can't see where it's going. And so it's useless. So keyboard is very important to screen reader users. So when you knew that this was fun facts about keyboarding, it's actually got three parts. And one part is a keyboard user, and one part here is our screen reader user who uses a keyboard. And then the third part is our third persona, who might be a person who cannot use a mouse or a keyboard. Either they cannot or they choose not to. So voice commands rely on the keyboard interactions to be correctly programmed. So I consider myself kind of a beginner in Dragon, naturally speaking, which is voice commands. That's the software that I use that I'm going to talk about some today. But I finally realized if the keyboard doesn't work, then the voice command can't work. Because if you say press tab and there's no focus, it's not going to do any good. So it took me a while to also grasp that these three are interrelated in the fact that they rely so much on the keyboard. Okay, so now we've got some persona. All right, so again, kind of a review. We're going to talk about keyboard only, screen reader, and voice command assistive technology. And when I started thinking about this, I recognize that there's a lot of other assistive technology out there, and it also may use a keyboard. For example, the head and mouse sticks, where people manipulate a raised keyboard with a stick, or sip and puff, where you blow a puff of air into a wand to send a signal. And I respect that these people need good keyboard, but I also want to say that these are beyond the scope of my presentation. And if you would like to tell me more, if you know more about these technologies, I'd be glad to go to your meeting, because this is an area that I admit that I don't know a whole lot about. So, although I will tell you, I've been coming to Access-U for many years, and one year they did actually have a sip and puff demonstration. But the room was absolutely full, and I had to stand at the door, look over people's heads, which I'm not that tall, because everybody wanted to see this person who does sip and puff. So I don't know a lot about that, but I think that making the keyboard work right will help them too. Okay. All right. So how users navigate. How keyboard only navigates is usually by tabbing from one interactive element to another, or shift tab to reverse the direction. The arrow keys, when you use them, when you don't have a screen reader turned on, the arrow keys just page you. They page you up or down, depending upon which keys you're using. And they're not used for interactive elements because the arrow key is not going to get focused when you're using keyboard only. All right, and then there's so many shortcut keys. I have such respect for people who use keyboard only and who use shortcut keys. I keep a little cheat sheet on the side when I'm testing with keyboard. I'm like, okay, I could do this, because there's so many. But a lot of software, Microsoft is one I'm going to mention, provides lots of shortcut keys. And so this helps the keyboard person, and that's great. And by the way, I'm going to reference things. I have a lot of resources at the end that you can look at, and they do provide this PowerPoint access. You will provide this PowerPoint for you online. Now, we had to send our PowerPoints in a couple of weeks ago, and so you get up in the morning, you're ready to present, and you say, I'd like to add this, this, and this. But I asked them, and they said, okay, you can send it after you. So the one you get, if you're online, it is correct, but I just tweaked it a little bit today. So anyway. All right. Now, how screen reader users navigate. So they also tab and use shift tab, but the arrow key works differently for the screen reader user because they can actually get down to interactive elements. Well, okay, let me put it this way. Some elements are programmed so that they don't really use focus correctly, but they expect people with a mouse to interact. And sometimes I've found in my testing that my mouse will get to, that my arrow will get to stuff and I'll be able to hit enter or something, but it's not really the way it's supposed to work. So the arrow key is supposed to navigate you. It is really not supposed to move to interactive elements because they're supposed to get focus. But anyway, that is something that happens. Now, also, I am more of a PC than a Mac person, but I have tested with both for years. So if you're a Mac person and you feel the need to correct me, you can, but I think I'm pretty good with this. I certainly go back and research a lot. So just to let you know, when you're on a PC, okay, when you're on a Mac, you're going to use the voice over key and the right and left arrows. But when you're on a PC, you're going to use the up and down arrows. So those are some differences. I don't know if any of you are called on to go from PC to Mac or Mac to PC, but you might want to know that there's some differences. And on shortcut keys, I'm just mentioning the screen reader shortcut keys of H and for headings, R and D for regions, B for buttons, and there's many more. And VoiceOver uses the VoiceOver keys plus Command plus H. But a lot of times when you want to investigate elements, you just use the rotor in Mac, which you get to with the VoiceOver keys plus U, and it'll give you lists of things like links and stuff like that. So those are just some of the shortcut keys. I'm going to reference DQ's wonderful PDFs, which they provide that you can get to if you look for DQ screen reader PDFs. They have a lot that are publicly available that explain all the screen reader users and many of the shortcut keys. So definitely use those. Okay. How voice command navigates. Now, I'm not really a huge expert at Dragon, but I work with it from time to time. And I was just amazed when you think about it, it's just basically using a keyboard. But now you're saying press tab, press shift tab, press down arrow, press up arrow. So you can navigate using the Dragon voice commands, but you're really talking like you're using the keyboard. So it occurred to me, this is like another time that you're basically using the keyboard. And then with links and buttons, you say things like show links or show buttons, and multiple items with numbers will show up, and you can say choose 9 or whatever. So there is a lot more to voice command, but I do believe that having a strong keyboard navigation helps the Dragon user a lot. Okay, now just a little bit of my experience with a Mac. When I use a PC, it seems to just default to keyboard navigation, but Mac users need to change settings. So you can go to System Settings and Accessibility, and then in the accessibility settings, you can choose full keyboard access, and there is a toggle button. So okay, this is something I just learned, okay? I thought, okay, I'm done. I turned on keyboard access, but we were testing, my manager and I were testing just recently, and the developers were getting one result, and we were getting a different result, and we're like, what happened? So I went in and I looked, and when I was testing both keyboard only and with VoiceOver, and when I turned on VoiceOver, it changed something. And I went back and looked, and that toggle turned off. So VoiceOver turned off the keyboard setting. I didn't know it was going to do that. And my manager didn't believe it. He said, I was watching and I didn't see it go off when I turned on mine. And I said, did you go back? Did you close that window and go back? And so he closed the window and went back. And sure enough, it turned it off. So what I'm saying is this, the Mac has chosen for VoiceOver to control your keyboard navigation sufficiently that you don't need that button and it's turned off. And I had no idea. Did some of you already know this? I mean, this is like, just learned it this week. It's like, okay, well, anyway, sometimes you have to make a lot of mistakes before you learn stuff. Okay, how users interact. So remember, I told you navigation is kind of one thing and interaction is something else. So now we're going to look at ways you interact. All right, so you can activate a link by pressing enter, but you activate a button by either pressing enter or space bar. And then there are shortcut keys, so they would help you with your keyboard interaction. And there's really no special key for table because the usual keyboard only non-screen reader user can see the table. so they don't have to navigate through the table. Okay, and maybe I should ask this question at this point. How many of you use a screen reader sometimes? I don't mean all the time, but do you ever use a screen reader for testing? Okay, well then I'm going to go ahead and say, please use a screen reader for testing. And I know there's a learning curve because I remember I thought you had to remember I was using a mouse when I started. I thought you had to kind of like select the text if you wanted the screen reader to read it. So anyway, but try it. Now, NVDA is open source, so you're not having to pay, although it's good to donate. And then, of course, JAWS has a license. And then VoiceOver comes bundled with Mac. So if you're a Mac user, you've already got VoiceOver. So be brave and try, because testing with the screen reader can give you, it's like opening a whole new world of understanding. And I'm not a native user, but I can see the difference when I use a screen reader, and it makes a lot of difference in testing. You absolutely can.
So you say table keys, no key is used, but what, I don't know, what if you have to edit a table, or what, I don't know if a spreadsheet would be considered a table, but how would you navigate? a
Okay.
spreadsheet?
The reason why I'm talking about table keys here is because the next slide is about screen readers. And screen readers actually navigate through tables in a certain way. So they use, and I'm going to say that in the next slide, they use, I'm going to sit here and forget what they are, Control, Alt, and the arrow keys to navigate through tables. But keyboard doesn't need that. But when you're talking about things like editing in Excel, that's a whole other thing. And so are you asking how keyboard works with Excel, or how screen readers work with Excel?
Not screen readers, keyboard only users.
Yes,
Um,
keyboard only users.
what if they have to, I mean, what if they're editing a table? What if you have a table and not Excel? But what if you have
Not
a table
Excel.
and they need to get into a cell to
So when you're
change
in
something?
Word, and I'm not an expert on Word, but when you're in Word, you can navigate using arrow keys to get in. If you need to insert like an insertion point in a table, you can use the arrow keys to move down Word. Most of my presentation is based on HTML and web pages because that's what I test. In our department, we have another person who's stronger at Microsoft Office than I am, but I have done some testing with Office. And yes, within Word, you are going to use arrow keys to get around. I hope that helps. Okay. All right, I was going to compare the keyboard to the screen reader. In the screen reader, some things are the same. You activate a link by pressing enter, or you activate a button by enter or space bar. For table keys, that's because the screen reader user needs to go through the table and hear the column headers as they go across, or the row headers as they go down. Now, when in my blurb announcement about what this was about, I said this is not a deep dive. So there's a whole lot more to, of course, screen reader navigation and keyboard navigation, that if I told you everything that exists, it would take 3 hours, I don't know, 4, a lot more. But anyway, just understand that having a table correctly coded really helps the screen reader user, but really makes no difference to a sighted person because they can't see the code that makes those row and column headers announce. So sometimes in this, I'm saying keyboard and screen reader share things, but sometimes they don't because there are just some differences in how they work. And in voice command, usually the person using voice command is sighted, or else they'd be probably using a screen reader. So they're usually sighted, and therefore they don't need to navigate through the table particularly. So it's really only the screen reader user who has special keys to get through a table. Okay, but it's really important. And I haven't said it, but I'll probably say it at least 5 more times. Standard HTML is the safest way to create accessibility. And when I talk about things like pressing enter or the space bar, if a developer has something that they have to use a lot of JavaScript on or create interaction, then they really need to know this to recreate the expected experience for the screen reader user or the keyboard user or the Dragon user. Because if they make a button that is programmed, I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. If it can only be clicked by a mouse, it doesn't work for screen reader and keyboard and Dragon. So those are just some things to consider. As much standard HTML as possible. If not, you must model your behavior after what it would be expected. And also, if I'm talking too fast, or if I need to stop and answer questions, just be brave. I'm sorry if I'm talking too fast. Are y'all okay? Okay, good. It could happen. All right. All right, how voice command interacts. So basically, they're saying the interactions. So they might say announce show links, and then the numbers appear on the links. Again, they need to be programmed as links for the assistive technology. And then you can choose 9 or whatever the number, and the focus will move to link 9, and then you can press enter. So you're going to expect a link to work with the same usual HTML standard behavior. And with activate button, you might tab to a button, and then you might say announce. I mean, when I say tab, I mean press tab. I should have, maybe I can correct that when I send out my PowerPoint the next time. Press tab to move to a button, and announce press enter or press space bar. So all these things all tie together of needing the right interaction. All right, one of the things that's really interesting is form elements, and they are so important in so many situations. And one of the reasons why I did this presentation on this topic is for what I'm about to tell you, which is a developer that I work with sent a message to me saying, I'm testing and I don't think my radio buttons are working correctly because I can't tab between the radio buttons. And I said, okay, let me explain. So the next thing I'm going to explain to you is how radio buttons and checkboxes are different, but that all 3 of these rely on the same keystrokes. So let's talk about form elements. All right. So first of all, when I was going over my PowerPoint this morning, I said to myself, not everybody knows what a radio button is and what a checkbox is. I mean, when you speak HTML all the time, you forget other people don't speak that language. So I thought maybe I better show them that the radio button is the round one and the checkbox is the square one. And the default nature of a radio button is you get to only pick one. And the default nature of a checkbox is you can have as many as you want or none at all. Okay, so now that we're clear, a radio button, I had a picture of a radio button here. So you see the circles, and those are radio buttons. You can only be a beginner, an intermediate, or an expert in this form. That's all you're allowed. Okay, so this is what happens. You tab to the radio group, and the first radio button receives visible focus, and you use the arrow keys to move down through the list. As the user moves, the current radio button is selected, and then you tab to leave the radio group, and it sets your choice. And I'll just tell you, the first time I wrote this, I wrote it wrong. I wrote it wrong because I said, well, you get to a radio button and you hit space bar or enter. And I tried that, even though I've used radio buttons for years, and I'm like, darn, that doesn't really work, does it? So, you just have to keep testing yourself. And it was so funny because I think Enter tried to submit the form. I was like, wait, no, that's not it. So anyway, so this really does work. And yes, I really tested after I wrote it wrong. All right. Now, checkboxes are the little square ones. And this is where you could choose 1 or more skills, or maybe none of the above. I didn't include that checkbox, so I guess you don't get to check that one. So what you do is you tab to the first checkbox, but really think of it this way. Radio buttons are really one element. HTML is made up of elements. And if you don't speak HTML, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it really means something in HTML. So in HTML, for example, you probably heard of headings, and headings are an element, and paragraphs are an element, and tables are an element. Well, in that same way, a radio group is an element, but it's just one element. Those radio buttons are not elements. They're part of group. Okay, because they're not going to exist in isolation. I guess you could have a radio button all by itself, but you hardly ever have that. So anyway, but they're a group, so they're one element. But when you come to checkboxes, they're actually separate elements. So because they are separate elements, you tab from one to the other, and they operate independently, and you press space bar to select them. So just a review, navigating through radio buttons, you use the arrow key, while navigating through checkboxes, you use the tab key. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to these presentations and people tell me all this stuff and I try to write it all down, just aren't you glad that AccessU is going to provide this for you? So you can go back and go, what did she say? I don't remember what she said. Because when I hear people talking, I'm like, I'm so glad they've got a PowerPoint somewhere I can go look that up. Anyway, all right. So then I thought, well, then there's also select or drop down. And since I speak HTML, I usually call it a select, but most of the people that don't speak HTML think it's a drop down, and that's okay too. So you tab to the select and you use the up and down arrow keys to navigate between options. Now, the interesting thing is just using the arrow key does not expose the list. And screen readers don't need it anyway. They don't need to see the list, they can hear it. So using the arrow keys, each choice comes up and is audible. Okay, but if you want to see it, you can use the space bar, and then you get to see the options, and then you can arrow through them, and then you can press enter to select an option. So there's just two different ways to navigate, but standard HTML allows both. So the keyboard person may want to see all the choices, but they don't have to. They could just use the arrow. Anyway, then you press escape and it collapses everything, and you make your choice and you can move on. All right, so how do we support keyboard users? What can we do? Well, the first thing is, as much as you can, please use standard HTML to support screen reader navigation to elements such as headings, regions, links, buttons, and tables. Now, I mentioned screen readers here because if you have never used a screen reader, you may, or well, for example, if you're using a keyboard, you don't try to navigate to a heading. You don't want to tab to a heading. A heading should not receive focus unless it's a button also or something. So headings exist and they can be seen, and they usually by a sighted person form a hierarchy, and you can see larger headings and smaller headings. That's all good for sighted people, but screen readers need to hear it, and it needs to be coded with a hierarchy of H1, H2, H3. You can also navigate using screen reader to regions, and they're just pieces of the page like the header, the main, the nav, the footer, all of those. But keyboard is not going to think in terms of regions. They're going to look for interactive elements on the page. So they don't really care if there are regions. Really, only screen readers care. And Dragon voice commands, they also don't navigate to regions because they're more like keyboard only. But it's good. You need regions. All content on a page needs to be regions. But the only way you can really check that, except of course with, well, Axe DevTools, for example, I can't remember if Wave actually checks for regions, but Axe DevTools does, I think. There's many that will check. But really the best way to check for regions is to use a screen reader. And then there are keys that will pull up a list of all the regions. Again, I could talk for like 3 to 5 hours, so I'm just going to tell you exist. Anyway, you have to support screen reader navigation to these elements, and they have to be coded properly. But that applies also for interaction for people who are using keyboard. So these focus, okay, the other one was more of a label. They have to be labeled correctly as a heading or region. But the second part is they also have to receive focus. And if you use native HTML, it will receive, these will receive focus. And you don't want everything to receive focus, but you do want these to receive focus. So you want to be able to tab to a link. You want to be able to tab to a button, a text field, a radio group, checkbox, other form elements. These are things that receive native focus, and you don't have to put focus on them. Like, for example, I'll talk a little while about tab index. Tab index is a way to control focus. These don't need a tab index if they are native HTML, okay? Again, I'm going to pause. Am I going too fast? Are you guys got any questions? So far, so good. Okay. All right.
I could ask the chat if you want real quick, if you're going too fast.
Excuse me?
Oh, no, you're not. Oh, they can hear you.
They can hear? Okay. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, online people, for confirming we're good. Okay. Non-standard buttons. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a story about buttons. Standard buttons receive focus, announced as buttons, and are activated by enter or spacebar. A non-standard button can be built on a div, but all of the expected interaction must be programmed. So it must receive focus. It must announce as a button to screen readers. It can be selected as a button by voice command, and it must be activated by enter or spacebar. So if, as a developer, you have chosen in your greater wisdom to only use a span or a div or something generic, then you got a lot more work ahead of you. Okay. What?
In your greater folly.
You know, I've seen where it just almost had to be done. Yes, it sometimes when you're applying JavaScript, you just, I don't know. I will say there could be times, but these are things you have to do. These are some suggestions to, yes.
There, Mike. Okay.
Well, if you're going to correct me, I'm looking forward to it. It's like, oh, yes, I get to learn something today.
My question was about voice control.
Yes.
So you said the voice control users need to be able to navigate to that as a button. Does giving it a role of button allow that for them, or is there something else?
Oh,
Okay.
again, I'd probably test that if I were developer.
Okay.
But I believe so. That's why I was going to suggest it, because Dragon relies on all the ARIA that screen readers rely on has to be programmed for Dragon as well. So I don't know how comfortable you all are with ARIA, but role is part of ARIA, and setting a role makes the screen reader announce that that element has that role. So a button, a programmed button, should be programmed, should include role equal button. And I believe that that is the case. But now you're going to make me want to go home and program it. I think you're safe if you put role equal button, but yes, you still need to check.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for asking. I thought I was going to get further instruction on programming. Okay, so you're going to add a tab index if you programmed it, because that tab index equals 0 forces it to receive focus. And then you're going to have the role equal button. And I said here to be selected as a button, so I'm thinking that's what happens. And you also will need to include programming, which is beyond the scope, to tell you how to force it to work with enter and spacebar. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out too, for speech to text, like Dragon, you need to make sure that the accessible name is visible.
And that's coming too.
Okay.
But you know what? I'm so glad you said that. I don't know if you understood quite what she said, but when you are using voice commands and you're telling it to do something, that's a sighted person and they have to look at it And therefore, whatever the accessible name is, and I have an example in a minute, the accessible name has to match what they see, or they are never going to get it right, because then they're just guessing. So those accessible names are very important. Yes. Okay. We're going to see that. Okay. I wanted to warn about tab index though. I have seen pages where people just went wild with tab index. It's like, okay, no. So tab index equals 0 forces an element to receive focus. It still remains in the tab order based on its position in the DOM. And just letting you know, the DOM is like the natural layout of the HTML elements in the page. Because I know sometimes people use the document object model and you're like, the acronyms, I hate acronyms, but anyway, basically you want it to be logical. You want everything to go the way you think it's going to go. And if you're cited, you want that to be a logical pattern. But if you put in other kinds of tab index, there's reasons. So for example, tab index equals -1 is legitimate when a developer is taking something out of the tab order temporarily until it's activated, at which case it gets focus. It switches interactively from tab. So sometimes with JavaScript, you have to do that if you want an element to become active based on another event. So that's legit. So don't go out there with your testing and say, no, you can't use -1. It just depends. So now another one though is 1+, like anything larger than 0. I just don't think so. Because at that point you have taken over. If you put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because you want them to go here first and then here first and then here first and then here first, everybody's going to be confused. And there's no point. And you know, so just don't. So -1 has a reason, 0 has a reason. Above 0, I can't see it being justified. Okay, so provide an accessible name. Now you have to use an accessible name for buttons, links, form elements, and other interaction. For screen reader users, the accessible name is required to understand the purpose of the interaction. So the screen reader user wants to hear the purpose of a link, the purpose of a button. But for voice commands, the accessible name is required for navigation because they want to talk to it. They want to call it by name. So the user sees a visible label such as button text and may attempt to navigate to the button using its visible name. If there is an ARIA label that does not include the visible name, that interaction will fail. So they'll just be lost. Okay, so here's an example. The button text might not, okay, this is two things. One is what to do for a screen reader, and the next one is what to do for voice command. So it might be that you had a button and you thought the sighted person knows you're activating your account, so they're just going to put activate. But it's possible there might be a need for you to add a little bit more for the screen reader user. You can add an ARIA label, activate your account. And therefore the screen reader user is going to hear a little bit more. So it all depends on what the purpose of your button or your link is. If you think that the screen reader user needs more than just what the sighted person needs. This is not always the case. And I cannot also tell you how many times I have seen ARIA labels on buttons that are identical to the visible text. And this is not necessary. It's just throwing an extra code in because the screen reader user and the Dragon user can hear that text or they can read that text. If that text is good enough, you don't need to just stick it. Some people think ARIA is a Band-Aid. If I put enough Band-Aids, then it'll work. And it won't. It's just extra. You don't need it. Okay, so in this case, I thought maybe you need an ARIA label, just as an example. But on voice commands, this example, the sighted user cannot see ARIA, but their assistive technology can. So when a user navigates using voice commands such as Dragon, the technology is reading the accessible name. You must use the visible text activate inside the ARIA label. So if the person said, oh, I want an ARIA label, I'm going to say create your account. Well, create and activate in this context are pretty much the same, except the Dragon user will never guess that you used create. So you have to have your ARIA label have. Now, I did some testing with this too. I was worried for a while. I thought, well, what if the Dragon user, what if I have an ARIA label, but it's more than just a visible label? And I learned that as long as the text that is visible is in the ARIA label, it doesn't have to be the only thing there. It just has to be present. And that will be, does that make sense? Yes.
I'm just gonna shout, you can repeat my question. Does the label name have to be at the beginning of the accessible name for the voice control to get it?
Okay, the question is, does the text have to be at the beginning of the ARIA label to match what's visible? And my answer, I'm pretty sure, I'm never 100% until I go back and test. No, I believe it just has to be somewhere in there.
Oh,
It doesn't matter if it's the first, the last, the middle, it just has to be present. And I have coded that. I'm very sure, I'm 98% sure. No, I think it is. I think you're right. It just has to be in there. It does not have to be at the beginning or the end, although that's a good question and something that went through my mind at that time too. So yes, it does. So anyway, I'm going to throw something out that's not in this at all, but you might need to know this. Do you use right click and inspect on web pages to look at your code? Is that a known thing? Does everybody, okay, so if it's not a known thing, you need to try it. You can look at those buttons that you're supposed to be checking, and maybe you're just testing with keyboard only, but one doesn't work and you don't know why. You can right click directly on top of an element and choose inspect. And then in Chrome, it goes to the side. And Firefox, usually I have it defaulted come underneath, but it opens up the code for the page. And you can go say, oh, what was the accessible name for that button? And you can actually see it in the code. So if you have not tried right click and inspect, you absolutely have got to do that. And then the fun part is you can choose edit as HTML. I'm sorry, I don't have this in here. You can choose edit as HTML and you can select it and then you can throw it into your document that you're sending to your developer saying, see what you did? Sorry, please, all developers here, forgive me. I have a great rapport with developers. So anyway, he has a question. That gives me a moment to breathe anyway.
There you go.
I'll breathe. And maybe everybody else needs to breathe too.
Breathing is good.
Okay.
So this might be beyond the scope of this session, and so maybe you're gonna have to answer this some other time, but
After testing.
yeah, there you go.
You told us about custom elements, like a custom button that's a heading or whatever that's got a row of button, or I guess it would be just a div that has a row of button. So you said that you need to make it clickable, but let's say that it has a tab index of -1 because you want to make it clickable through JavaScript. If I use this trick that you just told us about of pulling it up in Chrome DevTools to look at the element, but the click event is managed by JavaScript, how do I find that? How do I look at that?
Okay, that's a good question. And this
Is it beyond the
good-
scope?
No, well, I'll just tell you my thoughts on that.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, I don't know if you know the difference in rendered HTML and the actual HTML. So if you do a right click and you do view page source, you're actually going to see everything just the way the programmer wrote it. It's all there. But that's not the same as rendered, because rendered is what happens when various things are applied to it.
Mhm.
Like there may be some CSS, there's a lot of things you can do that change rendered. And that -1 thing is going to be part of the rendered. So what you're going to see is whatever the current state is. You're not going to see until you click. Now, sometimes, depending on how much changes on the page, sometimes you can click and now see the new version. But there are also tools that will go through and capture that. So I've used XDev tools more, but I've also tested with some other, I'm going to mention a product that I have never had a paid version, except we tested with it called Evinced. Evinced. Okay, but what some of these do, and I think that DevTools is doing more because it's a competitive market.
Mhm.
There are tools that will allow you to be interactive, and it will record your progress,
Mhm.
and it will tell you what's happening along the way. But those are with tools. Those are not just in the inspect. Now with the inspect, based on your question, like I said, you can look at it before and then you can click and look at it afterwards.
Mhm.
And you may be able to see that change in rendered code because it will have changed. But like I said, that depends on what else happens. If your whole page moves over somewhere, then you may be lost. But anyway, some of those tools will trace your journey, and those are becoming more and more needed, but those are usually paid tools. So they're good though. I mean,
I bet.
they're good. They were, sometimes you need them for complicated.
Yeah.
So does that, I don't know, does that make sense that, yes? Okay.
Okay, I'm very new to voice commands. Is ARIA like the basis for ARIA or for voice commands, or is
Oh,
something
that's a
else?
good question. Okay, so it's like this. ARIA is code that's written in the HTML
Right.
to provide support for assistive technology.
Mhm.
But voice commands don't always have to use ARIA to get places, because with native HTML, just the regular HTML is sufficient. When they're set up as a button element, then the voice command can call up to show the buttons, or when it's set up as a standard link. So you don't have to have ARIA for voice commands to work. But sometimes it's there, and if it is there, Dragon can see it, and we'll look for that. Anything else? Do any of our online people have any questions or comments? Are we good? Okay, all right. So we had that example. Okay, now, this is a skip to main I want to talk about. How many of you have actually seen a skip to main happening? Okay, well, this is why you need to do more keyboard testing and go to some sites. I always go to American Foundation for the Blind, okay? I'm just gonna say, they're probably gonna not screw up, okay? So they're gonna have a skip to main, but lots of sites have a skip to main. And one of the problems with skip to main, for me, is do people realize that skip to main works for both keyboard only? Well, not both, all. You know what? I don't think a Dragon person would care about skip to main, but a keyboard only would, and a screen reader would. And the reason why is if you're at a website and it has the same navigation on every page, it is really boring to go through all of the navigation again and again and again. So if you coded it right, you jump from the skip to main, which should be the very first link on the page, and you jump past the navigation to the main part of your page so that you can then go ahead and read it. But what you have to do is, some people don't like to see the skip to main. So you have to set your CSS so that the skip to main shows up on focus, okay? Because then the keyboard person can see it and the screen reader person will be able to hear it. And of course what am I trying to say? The CSS won't affect the screen reader. That will only affect the sighted person being able to see it, but you need both, right? So you need to see it, and then the screen reader user will hear it. So I pretty much kind of explained this. It should be the first element in the body of a page, and that both keyboard only and screen reader users need this. Okay, now this is just a one way to set it up. There's more than one way. There's more programming that can go into it. This is a very simple skip to main. So you have a hyperreference equals hashtag main, skip to main. You set an ID on the main region. The skip link requires an ID. A link does not automatically jump to main. Another time that I screwed up, but anyway, I figured it out. I thought if you have an element on the page that's called main, that your skip to main should just go there. But that is not the case. You actually have to have an ID, even if it's called main. For that same reason, It's the ID that controls it. So sometimes people have a div, role equal main, or whatever, that's allowed, or they just have an element main, but neither one of them really makes so much difference as the ID. The ID equal main is what causes that jump link to jump. Now, if you don't usually speak HTML, this may be more information than you need. But remember, you can always right click on it and look at the HTML. So now you know. There's that. Okay, now focus indicator. The focus indicator has two aspects. Sighted users of keyboard and voice command must have a visible focus to determine their location on the page. And when you start keyboard testing, you will see how frustrating it is to have absolutely no idea where you are. And I have certainly experienced that many times. So you have to know where you are. The thing about testing, though, just letting you know, is the screen reader itself provides a focus indicator that it applies as you tap. And it's, people say, okay, why does a screen reader user need a focus indicator? Aren't they blind? And the answer is maybe, maybe not. There's a whole range. So there are people who use a screen reader who can see. But the thing I'm telling you now is that the focus indicator, when I'm testing, and I've already tested a keyboard without the screen reader, and I know there's some focus out there that I can't figure it out. So I turn on the screen reader because then I'm going, aha, that's where it is. And then I know where it is because the screen reader hears where you are. It tells you where you are, and you can usually see the visible focus. But that's not good enough. The keyboard person needs it, so you can't get by with that. Just saying. Okay, so you need a visible focus. And number two, these users also must be able to see changes in an interactive element, such as a button, between the focused and the unfocused state. Okay, and yes, there is CSS for that. And yes, you should use that. It's almost like whenever I see an on hover in the code, I get a little annoyed, okay? Because on hover is only mouse. You have to have on click, you have to have on focus, you have to be able to see stuff. So some people are only thinking about mice when they write programs. They only think mouse. Okay, so and even though the emphasis is on people using a keyboard sided mouse, users also benefit from visible focus. So, all right, some techniques for focus indicator. I reference a bunch of WCAG and it's at the end so you can look at it. But anyway, when text fields receive focus, a vertical bar is displayed in the field. That's one way. Highlighting, the user can insert text, or all of the text is highlighted, or in other words, you're going to see a cursor there, or you're going to see some kind of change, a vertical bar saying where you are. So when a user interface receives control or receives focus, a visible border is displayed around it. These are ways. There's more ways. This isn't everything. This is what visible focus looks like, and you need it. So you can see the cursor, and the screen reader user can hear that they're in that. They can hear edit. Okay. All right, now this is just an example. These are interactive controls. So you have color contrast. So color contrast is going to be a feature of focus indicator. You have to have proper color contrast. And there's lots of techniques, which is why I provided a w3.org reference, because there's lots of ways to do this. But I really like this dark line coming in to show you. And you do have to have a 3:1 contrast between the color in the inactive and the active state. But this, as I said, this can't be a deep dive because you can spend hours on color contrast and focus indicators. So please read the page. A lot of people put a lot of good work there. Okay. Now, focus order. Remember my whole scolding about tab index? Okay, so tell me, here we go. Verify that the page has standard focus order. Start in the upper left-hand corner. Now, I'm going, this is a disclaimer. This is the United States. This is English. This is probably not preferable for countries who have languages that go the other direction. But I haven't tested in those languages. So I'm just saying, this is the expected order because we think reading order is left to right and up to down or top to bottom. That's just expected when you're reading a book or anything in the United States, or if you're in an English-speaking country. So that's, and also the DOM order. Like I said, some people don't always speak HTML, but it's like this. You may have an element and you may have another element next to it. And sadly, you can write CSS that switches those visibly. And that is not a good plan. If you're going to do it, you can make them come side by side, but you don't break the order just because you can with CSS make things present and not be in the right order. So they should be in the expected order for people to get where they need to go. Okay, now here is a tool that allowed me to do screenshot that showed you how we are traveling through this website. And just to say, this is American Foundation for the Blind, and you see that it starts in the upper left-hand corner with the skip to main, and you see that it proceeds through the top and past the search input and to the donate button and then over. And off of each of the links, there are multiple focus that are showing. And the reason why I'm pointing that out to you is because for a keyboard only or screen reader user, if you don't have a skip domain, they have to hit every one of those. Every one. So like the first one has 5 hits and the next one I think has 7, all the way through until you finally get to the first article on the page about Helen Keller Achievement Awards. And so this is painful. This is one reason why you need to skip to main. Okay, modals. So everybody knows what a modal is. A modal, again, do you speak HTML? So a modal is that little pop-up thing, and it usually has information in it. And when it pops up, the focus moves to the modal, or it should. And that's another thing. As a developer, if you're going to use a modal, you're going to have to get really good at focus management because you have to get focus into the modal. All right, but then the other thing you have to do is you have to trap focus for both the tab and the arrow keys. So I've told developers to do this, and sometimes they only do the tab because that's all they're perceiving. But the trouble is you have to also trap focus for the arrow key, because what happens is if a modal is set up there, and if you can get out of it, then you hear, instead of the modal, you wander around in the back and you hear all the stuff behind you on the page, at which point you are completely lost. And you're like, I thought I was in a pop-up. I thought I was in a modal. I was trying to listen to that. So please, please be careful to trap focus. And I admit, I don't know the programming that it takes to do that. But I admire the people who do, and I do believe you have to hold developers to that. Yes. Microphone?
If you use the native HTML dialog element, which is new-ish, last 10 years or so, it does that focus management for you.
Awesome. The dialogue.
So you should probably use that native
And so
component.
tell me, does that work in all browsers and all screen readers?
Yeah.
Say it again, the dialogue.
The native HTML dialog element.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I wish I had my pen and paper out. I'll have to remember this, the dialogue element. Thank you. All right, so your focus starts at the top of the modal and you close it with an X or escape. And there can be some other like submit type things or depending upon the function of your modal, but you have to be able to choose to close it. You shouldn't suddenly jump out of it and be running around. Okay. I feel like unless I didn't put my things in order. Oh yeah, that's correct. We were ready for 7. All right, big rule for keyboard interaction. If a mouse can do it, the keyboard should do it. Do not write code that creates an action that can only take place on mouse hover. This includes activating color changes, use on focus in addition to on hover, create interactions based on hitting enter or spacebar as well as mouse click. So just think about it. All right, what you can do. Okay, test keyboard only, test with 3 screen readers and a voice command software like Dragon. Now that would be best practices. On the other hand, if you can just use standard HTML as much as possible, be sure all interactive elements have accessible names and test with a keyboard. So when you're testing or your developer is testing, just ask, say, did you test with a keyboard? Even if they haven't taken the time to use a screen reader, at least test with a keyboard to see if that works. That is a big first step. So if you can do that, you're better off. Okay, so that would be my plan. And yes, I do have to test with 3 screen readers and Dragon. I didn't say it was easy, but anyway, nor am I an expert on all of them. So if you, whatever one you use, you're probably good at. Okay, so I have multiple resources. And therefore, that's why you should just look at the PowerPoint because you don't have time for this. So just telling you, there are specific WCAG guidelines that have to do with this. And for example, info and relationships has to do with the accessible names, the contrast minimums I mentioned. They're specific to keyboard. These are just all interesting to me. The bypass blocks, the labeled and named, these are just interesting. So read these at your convenience, but they're provided. There are some that are new to 2.2 that I didn't dive into today, but it's really cool because they talk about how if you have focus, you can't obscure the focus. So you can't have one thing on top of another thing that's receiving focus. So I think that's a great one. So there's that. Okay, and then there's just lots and lots of resources. There were so many that I just thought, well, you guys would appreciate, you know, WebAIM, for example, or I looked up some information about Sip and Puff that I didn't know. And then there's lots of shortcut keys. And of course, DQ University with all their advice about screen readers. So these are Mac resources about how to use the keyboard, and also both from Apple and from DQ. And then Dragon commands. This is just a start on Dragon commands. There's one I meant to mention here, My RSI Life. So do you offhand happen to know RSI, what that acronym stands for? So repetitive stress injury. And that video, and he has a whole series, is a young man, young, a lot of people are young compared to me, but anyway, I'm going to guess him at 35 to 40, but I have no idea. He's young where you wouldn't think. He's got old age type of disabilities with his hands, but he developed repetitive stress injury and could not type, and he is a developer. He's like, how am I going to write my code? So he has some really good this is the myrsilife.com, and he has some good information about Dragon and voice commands. So I referred to him when I was learning about it, because you don't always know when things are going to happen to you. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for coming. And I'll go ahead and throw this up with my contact information. But I'm just, do you have questions? I think we're over at what time, 10? So we have quite a bit of time for questions, or of course you can always take a break. So you guys, I hope you learned something today. I hope I didn't talk too fast. Oh, thank you. Thank you.